everybody, and welcome. Welcome to the webinar about how to succeed in e-commerce SEO in 2023. My name is Lidia Infante. I'm the Senior SEO Manager at Sanity, and I will be your host for the next hour or so. We've got a panel of experts that I can't even begin to describe how amazing these people are, but I'm going to give it a try, okay? So let me tell you about the people who are joining us here today. First of all, we've got Kevin Indig. Hi, Kevin.
Hey, good to be here.
Kevin is a growth advisor formerly at Atlassian, G2, Shopify, and he has created a guide for Sanity on how to win in e-commerce SEO, which is what has inspired us to create this webinar. When I was trying to come up with a way to describe Kevin, I went on his LinkedIn and I was stalking him for like an hour, and I honestly could not come with a summary. This man has been everywhere. I'm so honored to have you here. Thank you, Kevin.
You're too kind. It's great to be here. Thanks so much.
We also have Tom Smith, our very own solution engineers at Sanity. Hi, Tom.
Hi, good to be here.
Tom has over 13 years of experience in e-commerce, and before he joined us, he was a technical director at an agency specializing in Shopify Plus. So he's got a lot of practical hands-on knowledge on how to succeed in e-commerce outside and inside of Sanity. We also have Laura Brady. I keep trying to say your name in Spanish, Laura. Sorry.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Laura also has a ton of experience in technical SEO and e-commerce SEO. She is currently head of client services at Novos, an e-commerce SEO specialized agency. And she was previously at Screaming Frog, which is much more known for their tool, but is one of the most prestigious SEO agencies out there. We also have Omar from Tinloof, one of
Hi,
our partner
hi
agencies.
everyone.
Omar is such an amazing person and the co-founder of Tinloof, a development agency that's doing some truly spectacular work, creating digital experiences for their clients using Sanity and Shopify. Tinloof's work is really, really, really inspiring, and it is an honor to have you here, Omar.
Thank you, Lidia.
Well, let's get started. So I really want to ask, especially Kevin, what are the basic principles that merchants need to understand in order to rank on Google?
It's a great question. And I just want to say how cool this panel is. I love that, we're not all super technical SEOs. Like, it's a very cool mix of people, and I'm just pumped to do this with all of you. And thank you, Lydia, and the team at Sanity for setting this up. It's really, really, really great. That being said, to come back to your question, I think there are a couple of key components that differentiates what merchants should think about in 2023 when it comes to SEO compared to maybe 2013. So if I just look back at the last 10 years, a couple of things that have become more important is to build a really outstanding brand. And a lot of people will tell me, oh, Kevin, brand has always been important. However, when we look at the search landscape, I know we want to talk about that in a bit more in depth, so I'm not going to go too deep. But when we look at what the search results look like these days, brand recognition and being a reputable brand have become so much more important. Another thing that's obviously incredibly important is to create buyer guides and help buyers make the right choice. When we think about SEO, customers or searchers are always in a problem-solving state. And merchants actually have a big opportunity that they mostly don't realize to create more content to guide users and buyers through the different steps of solving this problem. So content is still incredibly important in my mind. And then there's a lot of thought that should go into the user experience on category and product pages. So, for example, when searchers evaluate your products, do they find answers to their questions? Do you make it easy for them to understand the size and material and all the important pieces of information that they need to make a good decision? And then lastly, there's, of course, there's smaller things like schema and a good representation in the search results, the merchant center. But that would be my shorter answer.
That's the short answer. Okay. That's like an incredible wealth of knowledge. And what I'm hearing here is I'm hearing you talk about three main things. One is the user journey, the merchant brand, and the actual optimization of the site. When it comes to the user journey, you talk about users are in problem solving mode. So both in like the informational stages of their queries to making a decision about what product to buy, understanding more about their needs. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's a perfect illustration.
Nice. And then we move on like how reputable is actually the brand, how recognizable and how likely it is that users are going to search for it.
Exactly. I think, and I don't want to hog the mic too long, so I'm going to keep that brief. But there used to be a time when SEO was regarded as a channel where anybody could just get a lot of traction, sell a lot of products, and in some small niches that's still possible. But most of the time, you compete with large brands out there, so you need to invest in brand awareness, brand popularity, good customer service, anything that helps people seek out your brand in the search results, and keep a positive sentiment about your brand.
Oh man, I love that answer. And the most interesting part is we've talked about these two factors, which are not actually straight pure SEO, right? So I am going to add another question to the pile. And I'm going to ask you, Laura and Kevin. Right.
Great.
So I want to ask you both, how has the search landscape changed for e-commerce merchants in the last few years? Do they need to do different things to rank? Have the SERPs significantly changed?
So yeah, I personally I'd say back when I started SEO, it was a lot easier because the results were quite literally just links and the odd like PPC ad, whereas now you've got images, videos, carousels, all of that. So you might be like in position 7, but you're actually position 14 if you like take into account. And a lot of those features are more visually appearing too. So even if you are in position 3, but there's this big image like taking up half the screen and it's like addressing you and it's like kind of calling out to you, then that doesn't necessarily mean position 3 is actually of any use to the consumer. And because it's e-commerce, everyone wants like a price on everything that you do. So something that we always recommend is just adding some sort of USP in that search, whether it's optimizing your image to say like free delivery or your title tags, or just adding something slightly unique that will make you stand out. Because as SEOs, we know how to get people onto page 1, but we've equally got to know how to get people to click on that result too, to make sure that it's of use to the consumer as well. And that's even more important now with like Amazon cannibalization, not on the high street, all those big merchants and stockists like Selfridges as well, who are stocking all your brands as well. So once again, you can still rank in first, but if they're running a sale and you're not, then people are more likely to buy your product off Amazon or somewhere else, and then you're losing out on those capabilities as well. So we're having to get a bit more like kind of creative with those things. And then the like kind of final thing I'd say is just like stock management and postal delays as well. At Christmas, that was massive. I know we're not necessarily talking about the physical landscape here, but if you were able to do fast delivery or you weren't using the Royal Mail during Christmas, and that in itself was a huge bonus because once again, you finally got the people on your site, you're ranking on the first page, but if you can't actually ship the item, then that once again is a huge issue that we saw it quite like impacted quite a lot across the like kind of Christmas period, and that in itself then will cause Google reviews to be affected and vice versa. So I'd say those are the top 3 things, but I could talk about it for hours.
Yeah,
And what do you think, Kevin?
Yeah, it's a great answer, Laura. And if I could add something from a broader perspective, the search results, especially for e-commerce, have gone through 3 bigger transitions. One is that it's much more pay to play than it used to be. Ads have always been a thing, but these days, pretty much, there are even a lot of informational search queries or keywords that show ads. So in a lot of cases, you have to pay to maximize the traffic you can get from the search results. And we clearly see in the data that product listing ads are much more efficient than classic Google ads, for example. So it's much more pay to play. 2, Google has become much more of a feed than these classic search results, where people are incentivized to scroll. There's they're not 10 search results anymore, but it's almost like an endless scroll feeling. And you have a lot of SERP features that Laura mentioned, like product carousels, especially on mobile. It feels much more like the shopping feed than the classic Google search results. And number 3 is that the classic search results, they're much less potent when it comes to driving clicks. But these days, you really have to make sure you're present in these organic product listings and product carousels. Visuals have become a lot more important, which Laura already mentioned. So, I would have argued that 10 years ago, as an e-commerce merchant, I didn't care as much about visuals, maybe on my landing pages and product shots, but not in the search results. And these days, you really have to think about how to draw attention. It's not the situation anymore that users click on the first couple of results by default. Their attention is being drawn from different features, and you have to think about how to compete in these SERP features to get attention and clicks.
That is really interesting. I see you both are mostly talking about like search on the SERPs. Have you experienced anything interesting going on with omnichannel search for e-commerce clients?
So we're seeing a lot of like kind of reset. We've had a lot of brands recently come in who would never position themselves as a TikTok brand, and we've actually figured that they're trending on TikTok without even having an account, because they offer a product which answers people's needs, or they offer like a kind of aesthetic. I think that's the word that everyone uses, and they fit within that aesthetic. And I had like a gardening client recently, and I was like, do you realize you've had over 400 million views on TikTok without even like having an account? And then if you cross-reference that with your website, you've got one kind of narrative going on there where people have almost invented their own names for your products and are referring to them colloquially or with what Amazon calls them, and you've just missed that whole gap in the market because you've got your own version of it going on the website. And if someone's moving from one platform to your website, you don't have a streamlined version for people to then find that product and purchase it, so they'll click off it and find it elsewhere. So a lot of the kind of recommendations we're making to clients now isn't necessarily optimizing their TikTok, but actually using their like TikTok videos and Instagram like kind of videos to optimize their website. Because if you've got a search volume of, let's say, 10 on one of your products, but you've had 40,000 views on it on TikTok, what's the weight up of what do you call your product? You're always going to go towards something on TikTok, because I don't feel like people trust TikTok as much. Even though they trust the video, they'll be like, is this TikTok thing worth it? Like, is it true? Is it a myth? Like, has anyone tried this? What are the reviews and everything? So you need to make sure that your website complements your other channels that you've got going on, and then back it up with user generated content and reviews and everything, just to really kind of hit the nail on the head with the EAT, but also just really kind of communicating to Google and the SERPs that you are a reliable brand and you're not someone's kind of selling a fad product as well.
That is super interesting and super insightful.
Thank you.
Yeah, another one that I would add to TikTok is YouTube. And something that I've found is that most buyers these days do research on YouTube when they want to buy a product, especially when it's a bit pricier or a product that takes a larger investment. I would say under $100, you might not spend as much time, but above that, you really want to make sure that you buy the right product. And it's so much easier when it's visual, but also when it's reviewed by a channel who you trust. So in my mind, as long as you're not a completely new merchant, you really want to think about how can you associate yourself with opinion building channels in your market, and ideally run influencer campaigns or sponsorships on that channel where you get your product in front of their audience and get this positive halo effect, right? Of course, the review has to be good. If it's a bad product, then you have a problem, but that can have a significant impact on search behavior, search volume, brand awareness, all the things that we mentioned earlier.
I love that. And I love that you're both talking about the importance of brand and what the user journey looks like. I know from my own experience, I search on TikTok all the time. And lately, every time that I'm trying to make like like a chunky purchase, I try to find it. But then I also have the same experience that Laura was talking about, where I see a product on TikTok, and because I have been burned, I go on Google and check out whether or not the hype is real. But before we move on to talking about users, something you mentioned earlier, Kevin, about how it's much more pay to play. Um, I am a big reader of your newsletter, and I know that you've talked before. I don't know if it has been on your newsletter or on your socials about how actually it is harder and harder to rank in SEO as authority gets consolidated by major players. Do you have something to say about that or any advice to give to merchants, especially D2C merchants?
Yeah, it's challenging. You already summarized it really well. One part of SEO is how authoritative you are as a brand, how popular, and established brands have an advantage. So you as a new merchant or younger merchant have a couple of different options. Either you seek out a niche that is less competitive, or you try to first establish your brand in different ways and then go into search. You can see that at large scale. It's not super helpful for maybe DTC players, but Shein is a great example of a company that didn't invest in SEO at all, but invested a lot in paid search and TikTok and influencers and build a super strong brand in that way. And now maybe they're not a direct rival to Amazon, but they've built a massive business on that. So it is, there are different ways to get to the same goal. And you want to be very strategic in how you invest across different channels to establish yourself as a brand. And then you can venture into other channels as well once you have that brand recognition. But I think the reality is that, SEO is a very popular channel, especially right now where a lot of companies have to reduce their costs and become more efficient. And that pushes even more merchants into SEO, and that does not make it easier. So you want to have a strong awareness of where you have an opportunity or a chance even to drive organic search, and what your strengths are. Are you a very innovative new product? Are you cool? Are you cheaper? So it kind of goes back to the classic, marketing principles of truly understanding the strengths and weaknesses of your product and then carrying that over to the right channels and seeing if maybe you want to start with SEO or you want to start with Instagram ads or TikTok ads or influencer campaigns or paid search. There are many different ways. So SEO doesn't always have to be the first choice, but it can be.
So for our next section of questions, I'd like to ask you about how the user journey has changed as a result of the introduction of other platforms in which we search, the changes on the search landscape, as well as a bunch of socioeconomic changes that we are seeing, and how can we as SEOs pick that up and make an opportunity out of it? I mean, this is for anybody, but feel free to to jump in. Omar, I see you've unmuted.
I can make a comment regarding the user journey. Is about the importance of page speed. Google keeps insisting on that, and one of the main reasons the clients get in touch with Tinloof is to improve their page speed. Many of them suffer a lot. If you run like tests on their stores, you can see that sometimes it takes even above 10 or 15 seconds to load let's say a product page, which is of course catastrophic for their conversion and even ranking. So this is something that, as you can imagine, users are expecting to be fast. They want to go on a page, they want it to load immediately. So we always try to push it in a way that it's below 4 seconds, for example, or even 3, depending on that. And there is one thing we noticed is that you cannot just take SEO as a standalone service or marketing element, but you need to see at other elements like design, for example. So the way you structure your page in a way that it loads fast, that way it can rank on Google, and how you can position all the content and control its layout has an impact on SEO. There is that. And the other thing that impacts the user journey, to come back to your question, is the availability of content in, as Kevin mentioned, in the how-tos, articles, and the blog content, and so on. And it seems like many e-commerces that we've been working with lately are suffering when it comes to that. So they use most of the time, of course, Shopify, and they have access to the Shopify CMS, but they still lack some customization when it comes to creating landing pages or blog articles in which they want to add more types of contents. And one of the reasons I think Shopify got to invest into Sanity is to enable that, to superpower the products via, let's say, how-to articles or landing pages dedicated to those products. So this is not an SEO ranking factor per se, as in, hey, change your H1 or meta title to have a certain number of character count. But I think when you empower your team and your marketeers with a great content setup, and all they have to do is focus on creating great content about the product, well, at least you have higher chances of that landing page or that blog article ranking compared to them having to dig into Shopify apps for the latest plugins for schema markup, for example. So yeah, to sum up, it's, I would say, page speed, key factor, and as well educational material, how to content, and some sort of, for example, comparison pages that you can automatically generate if you have the right Shopify X Sanity setup. But we can get more into details about that later on.
That is super interesting because there's often a question of when does the job of an SEO end? And there's some people who defend that ends at the click. There's some people that defend that it ends at the sale. There's some people like probably Kevin or myself who are pretty sure the job never ends. I'm really curious to see as well, because Tom, you've been making e-commerce sites for the longest, I believe, of all of us. Would you care to comment on how the user needs have been evolving in the last 13 years?
I think I would echo Omar's kind of assertion around page speed. For me, that's something that, particularly in my last few years at the agency, was something that came up all the time as kind of the what people are told they should do. I think definitely a lot of merchants read online a lot. Page speed, page speed, page speed. This is the be all and end all of your SEO, of your conversion rate, of all those different aspects. So for me, that's something that I've seen a heck of a lot of focus on. And I guess in my experience, often the page speed enhancements are around reducing often reliance on third-party apps and the like. I think particularly in e-commerce, you see a lot of usage of third-party review platforms, all these different platforms that layer on top, help desks, live chats, all this sort of stuff that begins to build up and build up and build up and really have a negative impact. And so I think kind of reducing reliance on that and also gaining control of that sort of thing and bringing that into your control is really key in kind of beginning to be able to manage those elements of page speed that you can then feed through into that user journey. And I think the other aspect that I'd comment on is, again, similar to Omar, is around kind of the unification of content strategy and sales strategy as part of that user journey. And I think often, in my experience at least, sometimes merchants in particular can get caught up in SEO being about traffic growth. And like you say, where does SEO begin and end? But actually, what's the point in traffic if it doesn't convert, if you don't integrate that strategy with your sales strategy? And kind of joining up those sorts of things and actually having structured, connected content which allows users to follow that user journey from a SERP through to purchase in an intelligent way, whether that's for product specific searches, brand searches, longer tail searches around those help guides and the like. How does that actually join up to a sales strategy? I think that's a really key thing to think about.
That's really cool. So what I'm hearing from you both is like the goalposts have moved for users in terms of page speed and content and the quality of that content. Kevin, I saw you unmuted. Do you have something to add as well?
Yeah, I was just inspired by the answers to make like a broader statement about user needs. One thing that we've learned over the last, I would say maybe most recently, is that user needs can also be somewhat different based on the audience you're targeting. So if you're targeting a younger audience, I would argue that Instagram and TikTok has to absolutely be in the mix, and the user journey happens much more there than maybe on Google. I'm not trying to generalize this broadly. It's probably very contextual, right? But whereas maybe, I would say like a higher aged clientele, they might still rely on Google so much more. So the one thing that we know for sure is that the user journey is not linear. We sometimes have this idea as marketers in our head that users come to our site, they read all the articles, look at all the product pages, and they convert. And it's often messier than that. Users might have heard about a brand, they check out the homepage, and then they get distracted, they do something else, and then come back a week later and look at the product pages, read the reviews, and come back later. So it's like it's a lot of these disconnected touch points, which makes attribution so much harder. But we know that certain audiences have different preferences in terms of where they like to spend their time and how they like to conduct research. So I think that's something super important to keep in mind. And I see Laura has also unmuted. Laura, I'm curious to hear your point on that.
I was just going to add to what you were saying. We've noticed like there's a lot of like kind of like I was saying earlier, aesthetic based searches these days. So people, it's not always a product they know what they want these days. It's like a look or a kind of particular kind of style. So we've noticed search volume going up a lot for like color, for example. So say we're working on an interiors client, we'd be like, actually, instead of like a shape of a sofa, well, actually shape is descriptive a bit more. We'd be like, okay, blue sofas have now risen by like, let's say 30% because one influencer put on their Instagram this like really cool blue sofa and everyone wants to buy one now because they don't know where it's from. And we've noticed those kind of keywords are really kind of quite more important and more, I'd say, commercial, because say you just typed in large sofa, yeah, you could get them ranking on page one, but you might be within a different price point, you might not be the kind of style they're looking for. So looking at what is trending on these platforms, and if you find that you have a product that matches it, and it doesn't need to be the same one, it just was within that style, and making sure you rank those products, and that means you're capturing the whole audience or potential consumers that you previously wouldn't have had. We've also noticed stuff like people searching for the stuff that influencers are wearing, or celebrities potentially wearing like one of our clients' products. And we work with this platform called Klaviyo, who do like internal search, and you can do synonyms on that. So say, for example, say like Kim Kardashian wore one of our clients' hoodies, we could type in like, you could type in Kim Kardashian in the internal search bar, and the hoodie she wore would come up. So then you're kind of getting users on site the right way, but also making sure the right product is shown to them, whilst also not having to change it if they're, like you said, the older audience have no idea who they are. But I also read a really like scary fact this week that millennials are now between the age of 28 to 42. So it's, we're not even trying to focus on the annoying millennials anymore. It's all the other ones coming up too. So it's interesting, like having to reposition your product for those different markets. I am within that millennial one, by the way, so I was allowed to say that.
I relate with the millennial thing so much. I remember the time where everybody was trying to sell to millennials, and now it's all Gen Z, Gen Z, Gen Z. I'm like, I'm a young millennial. Am I still the center of attention or what? So I love that you have mentioned Kim Kardashian. It sounds like an excellent segue to talk about Sanity clients. Um, at Sanity, well, Tom and Omar can talk about this a lot more, but we have been solving with technology some of these issues that merchants have been bringing in. And I'd love to hear from you both, Tom and Omar, about the issues that your clients have been presenting in e-commerce and what have led them to find different technological solutions for those.
I can give some context if you want here. So many times the clients, they get in touch with us because they want to, let's say, go away from some limitations that they may have with some Shopify themes. And aside from page speed, which we have already discussed, they want to have some custom features like product finders or automated comparison pages. And sometimes it has to be so customized that they may not rely just on a plugin, or they want to do some third-party integrations, and it's not possible if you don't have control of the front end. So they are very attracted by this headless Shopify approach. And furthermore, they want to integrate Sanity or any other content management system, but in this case, it's Sanity because of the great Sanity Connect app for them to manage, let's say, a product finder or a comparison page, so that they can, number one, of course, engage more the users. And this has direct implications on SEO as well. So if I type find fertilizer spray garden USA, you want to rank that page first. It may not be, this is like a current client of ours. It may not be, for example, a product detail page, but at least you will go in it and you will spend time on it, and it will give a signal to Google, hey, there is something going on this page. People are spending minutes interacting with it, going from a page to the other, going to a product page. And then because you have control of the layout via Sanity, because you have full control of how the page is structured, this is something that still many of our clients are not used to. I think it takes some education to understand that you have many tools that you're using. So you have Shopify for your commerce, you have Sanity for your content, you can have mugs for videos, and you can have all sorts of third-party integrations. And definitely, so there is this custom features. And the other thing is the automation of so many of these tasks. They really stop focusing on, for example, schema markup or same as URLs, JSON LD, or sitemap generation. There is that. The other thing is you can also customize their localization setup. So especially for international merchants, you can make it in a way for them to produce content very fast. So I think one key term here is velocity. You can go super fast when creating content, and at least you will go earlier than your competitors. So at least have that advantage.
That is really cool.
Yeah, and I think for me, again, like I said earlier, it's about kind of getting control and bringing these things into your wheelhouse, your area of responsibility. And different commerce platforms have different approaches to this sort of thing. So I've done a lot of work with Shopify, as have Omar, but a lot of these things apply to regardless of the commerce platform. We're very platform agnostic at Sanity, and we're keen to express that, and these sorts of advantages can apply across all sorts of different platforms. I think Omar touched on it a little bit there, but the ability to automate these things and using structured content to intelligently build up things like cross sells and upsells and things like that on site, and using data to do those sorts of things. I think once you move over to a different infrastructure, a headless infrastructure, you do get a lot more control over those sorts of things. And again, those things I talked about earlier in terms of third-party applications and being able to integrate closer with them, deliver those in a different way that's more optimal, and the like are really the key benefits for me. But I could probably talk about Sanity and content management and structured content and the like for a long time. I'm more than happy to pick up any conversations with people on that following this. But I think for me, the just being able to break free of those restrictions and have the routing you want, have the relationships between entities that you want, and then also kind of feed that through into your strategies again. So like, for example, being able to, I used to work with a lot of food and drink brands, and one of my pet hates were recipe pages that didn't have schema. And being able to control data like that in a more manageable, structured way, and then deliver that on the front end, then you can start to factor in, well, if we're getting people in from recipe aggregation websites, and how then can we link our products to that nicely to try and get them to then move on and buy, and being intelligent in all that sort of stuff.
I think that's really interesting. And you've both spoken a lot about regaining control of how your shop is displayed. I think that must have to do with like these changes in the user behavior and the heightened user expectations with it. It's a sentence that marketers love to use. But we were talking about Kim Kardashian earlier, and I really wanna ask you, Tom, teach me to sell online like Kim Kardashian. Kim Kardashian has her shop with us, Skims. Do you want to tell us about this implementation?
Sure. So they are using Shopify and Sanity, and they're using our Sanity Connect app to synchronize content, products, variants, and collections from Shopify over to Sanity, where they can then enhance that content and build that out, and give more life to that content. Their front end, I believe, is built on Shopify's Hydrogen framework, and that's I think a really good example of how that tech stack can work to your advantage and deliver a really good outcome. I think one of the really interesting things is handling things like massive product drops. Those are certainly considerations with kind of the sorts of setups, and obviously any setup really. But that's something we've definitely seen with Skims is the scalability of the Shopify infrastructure, the Sanity infrastructure, and how actually when you start to use platforms together to work nicely and kind of scale up these things, it can be a really beneficial way of handling those sorts of big drops.
That's really cool. Doesn't it ever, have we ever had issues where their products go too viral?
There's always a risk, you never know. Yeah, I mean that's the really interesting thing in e-commerce. Actually, I don't think there's any other vertical. Obviously at Sanity we work with a lot of e-commerce brands, but we also work with a lot of media brands, marketing, all sorts of different verticals. E-commerce is the one really where you see these big spikes of traffic, where suddenly you go from 10 requests a minute or a second to 2,000 requests a second, like that. And actually having, there's a lot of infrastructure concerns that I could probably talk about for a long time, but maybe would bore people to death. But needless to say, we do that, we handle that. So yeah.
That's cool. What's your experience with that, Omar?
With what exactly? So I can answer precisely.
The potential of a product going too viral.
We didn't have that yet with our clients. They're not like the viral clients, I would say. But one thing I could mention though is that they are trying to push their product page in a way to, I will not say go viral, but at least create tons of engagement in a way that they don't want just to put description, pick your colors, add to cart, but they really try to put as much context as they can on those pages. And for example, what they do is they can pick, for example, from their CMS, this is often bundled with this, then they put a video in it to explain how it can be used. Then they say these are other related products, some more FAQs and so on. And yeah, this has been helping them in getting more traction for sure. But so far, we didn't see any Kim Kardashian viral type of product with our customer base, maybe one day, but that's for it, yeah.
Yeah. Laura tells me we got the wrong Kardashian.
Yeah, sorry, it was Courtney who wore my
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
I'm not.
I don't
I'm
know
not as woke as
about
everyone.
them.
I was just going to say
Okay.
something to add to that too is just making sure that your page doesn't 404 with all those links and all the media talking about people wearing your products, because then you're losing all that link, all that value. So yeah, off the back of what Omar was saying about like kind of relative products and all that kind of stuff, just making sure you can keep users on the site, and you can even say like get a bit of an omni-channel thing going and being like, if you sign up to our newsletter, you'll be the first to know when this product's back in stock. So then you're pleasing the marketing and the brand team as well, kind of teasing them in with an SEO recommendation, and then keeping users on site and keeping all the valuable backlinks. And then if it ever does get discontinued, then just making sure you redirect that page back to the nearest category or homepage too. So then all those links are passed back on too. And then you've kind of got more of a holistic approach.
I want to make
I
one
love
quick comment related to what Kevin mentioned earlier, that companies are cutting costs a lot, as we can see from this year and the previous one. And it may seem marginal, but over the long time, it makes sense. But when you have too many Shopify plugins, one for schema markup that costs you $40 a month, one for whatever frequently bought together, and so on, and it adds up to hundreds, if not more per month. You can make that for free when you go for a headless setup, because it's just lines of code. And because you control it from the CMS, you no longer need to pay for that. So that's something we've noticed a lot, is that companies are paying for something that could easily be turned into a free thing. You don't need to pay someone to make it possible to have schema markups, for example. So that has an implication as well when it comes to making use of tech to like improve the SEO of your page when it comes to cost. Yeah.
It's a really good call out. And something I want to add to that is we're talking a lot about infrastructure and headless and a lot of the tech things, and they're absolutely important, because you as a company, as a merchant today, have to think about how to enable yourself to do good marketing and shipping and SEO. Obviously, we're talking about SEO, in e-commerce, but there's nothing worse than knowing exactly what to do and then not being able to do that, right? You're kind of being held back by your tech stack.
Yes.
And a lot of companies see tech stack investments as removing tech debt or a cost center, but matter of fact, it enables you to do marketing customer acquisition in the first place. And if you cannot be agile, I'm not talking about agile development, but agility as in being able to ship quickly, pivot quickly, jump on trending topics, then you have a massive disadvantage as a company today, right? So maybe if earlier you asked me, okay, what can you do against these big incumbents who are having a lot of brand authority and a lot of domain authority, and they're so they're doing so well in search. One of the things that you can do is just simply to have to run on a better tech stack and be able to make changes faster, spin up new pages faster, and provide a better customer experience as a competitive advantage.
Yeah,
I think that's
so
so important. So it's so important in e-commerce as well to be responsive and be able to do those sorts of things. And I often used to say to my clients, like, treat your online store like you would if you were an in-store manager. And if the shop over the road selling the same stuff goes on sale, you go on sale. If they put up a big poster, you put up a bigger poster. If they're really clean, you clean up. And often I think online presence isn't treated that same way, and I think it's particularly important in e-commerce, and that can be a separator, creating an experience. Why come to you rather than go to Amazon? You need to have an offering there.
Yes, 100% is so relevant for D2C merchants because, and I know I'm here to host, but I'm so passionate about this specific topic. D2C merchants, by not offering a personalized experience on their store and just rinsing and repeating the Amazon template of a product page, they're losing out on margin and also on client insights. It's just so important, especially in D2C, to actually provide a personalized, remarkable experience for your clients that mimics the experience that they would have in store.
Yeah, I just want to echo what you just mentioned, is that it's possible, of course, when you have control of the front end, to make it in a way to adapt to the user. So you can use tools like Uniform, for example, and then based on the user's intent, you can display a certain messaging or the other to help you, keep the user more on page, convert more, and so on. So it doesn't have to be just one messaging or one template. And again, because of this headless setup, you can also control that from the CMS itself. So it's pretty powerful when you do the right integrations and the right architecture, and it has an effect on pretty much everything. And SEO is one element as part of them.
That is so incredibly interesting. I really, really love that aspect of like a composable platform when you can actually like personalize the experience of each user. But SEO nowadays becomes more of a product-based approach. Can you please put some light on customer-centric approach when it comes to optimizing your website?
I can make a comment on this if you want. So if you want to increase the time spent on the page, at least I'm speaking again of the approach we have, because you have full control of the design. You can make it in a way that it's adaptable to your target audience. It doesn't have to be a theme or even a custom theme. You can really go nuts when it comes to interactive experience. So that's something that makes it very tailored to the user with the product page. And as I mentioned earlier, because you have full control of the page layout, you can make it different based on the product. So Kevin mentioned earlier that sometimes your product is less than $100, or there's more. You don't have to follow like a strict template. You can decide on which elements to position first, how to build a story. That way you can convert more easily.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
And maybe another addition about customer centricity. If you're truly customer centered, then you will prioritize customer value even over your own product. And I think one of the best kind of examples of that, to make that a bit more tangible, is that sometimes it makes sense in your SEO strategy to write about a set of products. For example, say you sell basketball sneakers, and a lot of customers will look for keywords like best basketball sneakers. And you as a company, as a brand yourself, you might have a big incentive to not mention your competitors, or maybe not direct competitors, or maybe just much weaker competitors. But if you're truly customer centric, you'll mention all the competitors, and you might even say what they do good or better than you yourself, right? So it's this brutal honesty and this brutal prioritization of what customers truly want out of their search that makes something truly customer centric. I would argue that on product and category pages, it can just be as simple as providing all the key information, and maybe even who the product is not for, right? Not every product is for everyone. Maybe your basketball sneakers are just for people with big feet, or for very small feet. And I think having the courage to be very honest about that and making customer lives easier, that's what it means to be truly customer centric in SEO.
That's really cool. Laura, do you want to add anything to that?
I was just going to say, we do something similar from a price point perspective too, because say I always use this example, but we've got a client and a coat on their website, £2,000. We're not going to like get them to rank for the word coats, because they're going to be among ASOS and Boohoo and everyone like that, and those just aren't the right audience for them. So and if they're a brand who are happy, we put like luxury, then the collar, then the coat, like you said, making it more niche. But if they're not happy with that, like what materials are used, how can you say that your item is expensive without saying it's expensive? And you kind of got to put yourself in the position of someone who can afford that one day. But you'd look at, is it like made from wool? Is it made from cashmere? Is it certain length, a certain style that kind of has that kind of sense of kind of luxury to it without having to say it? Because we find with these brands too, they're very brand heavy and there's only so much you can do. But then on the flip side too is like, on the other side of the price point is making sure you have user generated content too, because sometimes these websites look so beautiful, they've got models or they've got these ideal homes showing off these interior products, and you're like, my house doesn't look like that, I have a dog, I have this, I have that, this is a mess, I work from home. So actually having user generated content to show these products in a real person's home or on a real person who has a similar figure to you or something like that, I think just having the transparency to show your products in those settings and kind of flaunt it and also almost show it as social proof can really help improve conversions, but also it's putting the customer first rather than trying to paint this idealistic image and then you losing out on kind of purchases via that too.
That's such a good tip as well, because you target your customers and communicate the brand of your value, not just on your website, straight on the SERPs. I really like that. And as a differentiator of clicks that could end up on Boohoo or ASOS, but actually might belong on your site as well. So I think that's awesome. Would you recommend investing heavily in one channel or spreading smaller spend across multiple channels?
I'm happy to.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, this one I just really resonated with because of something that I was speaking to someone today about it. We've noticed recently that a lot of clients who have had funding come through or very reliant on funding kind of go straight to PPC, but obviously cost per click is going up at the moment. So then it's becoming more and more expensive. And as say some funding rounds have dried out, or say they're not going for the next round of funding, they're spending all their money there, but they're so far behind on SEO or social or something else that the catch up then requires investment and resource too, and they're kind of stuck in this limbo phase. So I think it's just important that regardless of what channel you go for, even though I'm an SEO, I'm very biased, but like, is making sure that you've at least got some tactics in other areas too, so that if one doesn't work out, or if you've used all your spend, or whatever happened, you have backups too, and you're not having to like kind of start from zero. You can hit the ground running and push it by those means, because you don't want there to be gaps in your market. In the same way, you wouldn't want to be like amazing on social media and then someone look at your website and go, these two brands don't match up, like this is being neglected and this is really being pushed. So you want to make sure that it's consistent, in my own opinion, but I appreciate it will differ for everyone else.
I totally agree. I think that's really cool. I have a question on a super hot topic, and I know, Kevin, you've done some research on it because I am a big reader of your newsletter. I'm not just talking about it. So, who will be the winners and losers with integrating AI into content creation? As mentioned, it is important to be responsive to the commerce environment. So, how much of an impact will ChatGPT have on brands? Is it a risk?
It is a risk if you do it dirty and lazy. And I think it's a big competitive advantage if you do it well. I didn't go to school for that answer. No big surprise here. The big question, of course, is like what means doing it well, actually. And what it means is a couple things. One, your content still provides value to users. And I think we need to spend more time as marketers to quantify what that means. A lot of times we have a very last touch approach to looking at content quality. Like, are people reading this or looking at this, and are they buying? But instead, we want to develop more metrics and look at more metrics that help us understand if they have a good experience. Like, do they spend time? Do they scroll through the whole page? Are there other interactions or engagements that they have on the page? And then if the content is created by AI, who cares? To put it very bluntly, right? It should not matter who creates the content. All that should matter is really how valuable the content is. The second thing, besides just user value, is also to invest more time in really good prompts when you create content with AI, and shaping content, right? I see a lot of marketers who they might go to ChatGPT and they say, oh, write me a buyer guide on basketball sneakers. And then they take that raw output and they might give it to an editor, which is a good idea, and then they push it live. But instead, they should ask themselves, okay, how can I keep molding this and shaping it like almost like clay, right? And keep asking ChatGPT to change the content, maybe put a higher emphasis on a certain subtopic, add more details, add more customer perspective, give it more, maybe a customer testimonial, and ask ChatGPT to add that to the content. So I think that the initial reaction is always to have maybe one or two prompts, but you can get to much better result by maybe having 10 or 20 prompts and then creating a formula for really good prompts for your content. So there's still a lot more depth in my mind for how to use AI to create content. And we haven't even touched yet on visuals and on things like customer support, which all kind of matter for SEO as well. So I feel like we're scratching the surface. And the biggest risk is doing it like, quick and dirty. But in my mind, if you have a high quality approach and really try to go the extra mile, AI can be a very, very powerful tool for SEO content.
That is so awesome. Wow. Thank you all so much, Laura, Kevin, Tom, Omar. Thank you for joining us for a Sanity webinar on e-commerce SEO. This was super insightful.